Hello and welcome to another live talking about our favourite subject of language learning. It's good to be back, and this week I know we were going to talk a little bit more about the whole indigenous, endangered and vulnerable languages that we started talking about last week, and we said that maybe there might be some more questions that we didn't quite resolve and wanted to talk a little bit more about, which is absolutely fine. And I also want to open up the floor to any other questions that you generally have about language learning and the world of languages generally. The reason I'm doing that is because this weekend I'm at home, but next weekend I'm going to be at the Memrise offices in London, delivering some training with some other people, and we will be also looking at some cool software that Memrise has been developing to help people learn languages, which should be a lot of fun. So make sure you look out for bits on social media about that and what it looks like and how it will be, and yeah, promise more information about that very soon. I got a question about the whole indigenous, endangered and vulnerable languages and what it means, indigenous languages generally, what that means, and what I mean by saying that. See, I mentioned that Celtic languages, particularly from my family, Welsh, is considered an indigenous language of the islands that I'm from, the island of Great Britain, and the reason it falls into that category is a dictionary definition of what indigenous languages and cultures mean, really. That's really where that comes from. I was alerted to a UN definition that would seem to be a bit different. I don't really go by necessarily other people's definitions of what's understood by a term in English or another language, although I'm absolutely fine for people to make their own feelings known about how they feel about indigenous languages and endangered languages and vulnerable languages, because we all interpret things slightly differently sometimes, and that's fine. As long as we have an understanding that we can discuss and disagree and agree. As far as I'm concerned, I'm quite happy to agree and disagree with people on many issues, and I think that it's actually quite healthy, as long as we keep our ears open to listen to other points of view. I think the mature thing is always to not cut each other off, and to even sometimes listen to things that are not even pleasant sometimes to listen to. I personally like to hear people's points of view that are drastically different to my own, and I do this in a number of languages, and it's taught me over the years to hold my tongue because honestly, I found that I don't tend to gain very much from getting into long drawn out disputes and arguments with people, particularly online, but also in real life, just because I think you're probably more likely to have a conversation that will lead to thought-provoking reflection if you go about these things in a calm way, I guess. I mean, of course, you do you, and everyone else needs to do what they want to do, and that's fine. For me personally, that's how I am, and yeah, as I say, so Welsh is an indigenous language of the the islands from where I come. Welsh, particularly the island of Great Britain, and then we have other Celtic languages that are also indigenous to those islands. So it's not just Welsh. A question did come up once about, well, isn't English an indigenous language from the islands as well, because it's from there? And usually what I hear is no, and that's because it's the dominant language and culture and has gone into areas of the other parts of the islands and dominated over them. So it's not usually considered indigenous for those reasons. So when the language is the sort of that with that kind of status within the in society, it's not usually considered that way. So I just wanted to clear those little things up first of all, and then also talk to you about your questions. I got a question on Instagram about how do you get into this space, language learning, language study, language teaching, this language space online, and I guess in life, in business, if you're a monolingual? Well, very easily. If you're monolingual, you already speak a language. So you have a language that you can deal with and deal in. And so I find personally that I have learned quite a lot from people who are starting out in their journeys, who are learning the first language or the second language, or however many languages they learn. I have actually learned quite a lot from people who are monolingual. So as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't really matter how many languages you speak or have studied or anything like that. It's never been particularly important to me. These kinds of questions really are important to me only for the personal journey that I'm on. But in terms of any type of status or anything like that within a sector, or even a display of knowledge, a monolingual who is, let's take my first language, which is English, a monolingual English speaker who could have potentially a lot more knowledge about the English language than I do. And even if I've studied a number of other languages, it doesn't necessarily make me the best at everything that I do. It doesn't make me better in almost any way, except that I have studied that many languages, so my experience gives me a good grounding generally in a number of languages, and an understanding of how those languages work, to be able to draw on comparisons, to be able to look at etymology, and I learn many things from different people with monolingual or even bilingual skills constantly. So if you are in that sort of position, first of all, the Polyglot Conference itself has a tagline, and the tagline is for everyone who loves language. And not languages, language. As far as I'm concerned, if you love language, you belong in the language learning community. If you're interested in learning languages and you're interested in language, then you have a place and you have something to offer. And you have something to teach other people, and you have something to share, and you have something to give. And so you're very, very welcome. So I hope that if you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, I'm on just starting off my journey in language learning, maybe it's your first, second language, but actually it's not your first language that you're learning. You already speak one very well, and as I say, that gives you a number of skills and a number of experiences that are extremely valid and worthy of sharing. So that was the next thing. I actually had a session as well, and I hope person, I'm not going to identify the person who it is, but I actually had a conversation with someone in one of my one-to-one sessions that I hold for language learning therapy. And I have a lot of these kinds of sessions, which I thoroughly enjoy, and I enjoy them for a number of reasons, because I also learn a lot from them myself. And the question was about people you see online, and you see them learning all of these different languages, and it almost makes you feel that you should be doing more, or you should be doing something else, and maybe you need to almost compete with them, like to run to catch up to them. Okay, now I understand this, and the reason I understand this is sometimes I have that feeling too, that I see somebody studying a language that I really want to learn, and I'm like, oh no, why aren't I learning it? I'm so lazy, or I feel bad, or I feel that I could do more, or if I just take on that extra language and I just do, instead of doing the languages I'm doing, I study even more languages, and I'll just fit it in, and I'll do a few words a day here and there, and it will build up and it will get better. the thing is, I have to stop myself there. And I stop myself there because I know it's not realistic. And I know that if I try and do that, or I do that, I will probably end up disappointed and not doing any of the other things particularly well. And also, I have other things that I have to look after and do in my life. I have a lot of work to do, particularly at this time of year with the conferences going on next month. And also, I have family and I have friends and I have other things that I want to and need to do to carry on with my daily life. So I have to stop myself from going down that road of picking up just one more language or another language, or until you sort of can't count how many languages I'm trying to keep on the go. The other reason is that, where do I use the time? Because once you divide your time, that's one thing, but then you divide your thinking time about and in the other languages. So it's not as simple as just saying I'm going to do 5 words a day or something like that in the language. It's a lot more than that that's really required. And whilst it is tempting and it can be almost demotivating when you see people doing things that you want to do, I advise caution, because not doing anything at all because of that, and because you've taken on more than you can realistically do, actually sets you back even further than you had with your original plans of actually learning a language. So stick to what you want to do. If you want to reconsider what your plans are, then that's a different story, and that's a conversation that you need to sort of have, maybe with other people, maybe with yourself. You need to agree with yourself what you want to do and what your goals and achievements need to be. The other reality that I want you to be aware of is what we see online and what we think people are doing and what we think their achievements are, and where we think everything is going for another person, is just that. It's what we think. And it's our subjective thoughts that we're projecting onto that other person, possibly because they're representing themselves in their best light, possibly because they're representing just the wins. Sometimes they may represent a few of the losers when they're having bad weeks or something. But generally, we see a lot of these wins, right? We see the good stuff. We don't see the mundane. We don't see the boring. We don't see the daily drudge of language learning. We don't see all of that all the time. And it's really important to understand that just because you're watching and perceiving something doesn't make that the whole truth about the situation. So sometimes, even when you see those kinds of things and you're trying to compete with those people, actually what you're competing with is the ghost of your perceptions of the person's achievements. They're not real things that you're actually going up against. Let's pretend for a second that everything you see and everything you perceive is exactly right. Okay, let's just pretend that that is true too. Okay. How far do you go? How far do you go with that competing? The competition can only last for so long. Now, even the more seasoned language learners out there will be very, very aware that there are only so many languages you can use in your day in a period of time. You're not going to be learning, like 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 languages to a very high level. There's always going to be a range there. There's always going to be times when some languages get rusty and others fall off completely. And there are going to be times where others are better. That's just the way it is. And it's an ever-changing landscape. Okay. And that's why these sort of serial language learners, these people that you see, often find it difficult to answer the question, how many languages do you speak? So competing with that is problematic. And it's problematic because if you're starting out on your language learning journey, it's best to focus on what you're doing now, because you can add later to it. The languages aren't going anywhere. They're not going away. They're not disappearing. They're not falling into some abyss where you can't ever go to them. You can. And what you'll find is once you've done 1 or 2 or 3 to a very high level, you'll find that you get your rhythm. You feel what you need to do. You get to understand how you work, and it does get easier with time. Okay, so chasing ghosts and chasing people for numbers is unhelpful for a number of reasons, because first of all, it's demotivating. It's an unrealistic goal, because you're chasing something you don't really know. You're second guessing it, but also you're setting yourself back by doing that in the learning of the languages you've started on. And also, the people you're chasing are not continually moving forward at the same rate, because there are only so many of those languages that they're going to use to a very high level. They may move on to other languages and do language projects. This is what I do nowadays. I do language projects. So I learn a language as a language learning project, have fun with it, enjoy it, explore the language, explore some of the commonalities, find out how the language works, find out a lot about vocabulary, how it fits together, and possibly to communicate as well to some degree, but not necessarily to become this amazing speaker of that language. That's not necessarily my goal, because I don't realistically, at the age I am now and in my part, where I am in my career, I don't necessarily need to speak another language to the level that I do for the languages I already use. So that's kind of where I am. That can change too, and I'm open to that, but that's kind of the reality. So let me give you an example. Let's say for some unknown reason, you were chasing me because you saw me learning Latvian. Okay, a few years ago, I did a Latvian challenge, and I went to Latvia and I was conversing with people in Latvian. It wasn't amazing, but it was kind of like maybe a B1-ish level, maybe. Okay, I could do more than just get by. I could have like quite a few conversations with people. So it was kind of maybe late A2, early B1, somewhere like that. Now, if you were chasing me for Latvian, you'd be bitterly disappointed now, because my Latvian it's gone right back down to so lower level that I could barely say anything at this moment in time. I could barely say anything to you in Latvian. So chasing that doesn't actually help, because you're chasing something that now no longer exists. Same with Finnish. I wouldn't be able to say very much to you in Finnish either. I've had periods where I could and couldn't say, and then could again in Indonesian after my Indonesian project. So these things go in waves. And so chasing a wave that ends up landing on the sand and going flat is sometimes what you're actually doing. So focus on the things that you want to get and you want to sustain and keep, and for you are important. I hope opening up about this and telling you and sharing this speaks to some of you out there that actually these comparisons, not just me saying with empty words, don't compare yourself to each other. You know, you're all amazing. I'm not going to patronize you with that kind of nonsense. I mean, it's true. You're all, everyone's amazing in their own way. I'm not going to say that that's not true either, but I'm not going to patronize you by saying that, because I'm not in the business of selling you, as I say in Italian, fried air, aria fritta. I'm not in that business of selling you nonsense. It doesn't do me any good. It doesn't do you any good, and it doesn't do my integrity any good either. So I've got no desire to do that whatsoever. But what I want to do is share the reality, and the reality is that those comparisons are actually quite useless for all of the reasons I've just given you. And I hope those reasons make sense to you. And if they don't, let me know, because I'd love to get your feedback. But that's the honest truth. And I still, even though I know all of this stuff, sometimes I also still feel that. I see people learning, I see Lindy or Luca learning Hungarian, and there's this real drive in me to want to learn with them. And it's a healthy drive. It's a healthy thing. I don't feel don't feel particularly jealous of them, but I'm like, oh, I'd love to be doing that too. You know, I just think, yeah, I'd love to be doing that. But it's, as I say, it comes from a good place. I feel quite happy with where it comes from. It's not an agonizing feeling for me. I appreciate that for some people it can feel more agonizing, more annoying, more disconcerting, more demotivating as a feeling, more negative as a feeling. But even if you feel that, I want you to know that everything I've just said now is absolutely true. So I hope that helps. If you have any of those feelings or any of those worries or any of those anxieties, I hope that helps. And they were the questions that I got and had this week that I thought were really important to tackle, first of all, and to discuss. And I hope it helped to talk about them. So let me see if you have any questions now. Hello, merhaba, hello. Well, I'm just checking Instagram first, and I can't see any other questions yet. Seeing lots of hellos, hello, and waving. Nice to see you all. Thank you for joining. Let me see on YouTube. In what languages did you have to overcome resistance? For example, you didn't really like the sound in the beginning or the people. Oh, very good question, Ivan. Or Ivan, sorry. So, okay. I wasn't hugely enamored with Spanish. I've said it. Okay, I wasn't hugely enamored by Italian actually in the beginning either. I don't know if I'd call them huge obstacles for me, but I didn't particularly like the sound of Spanish when I heard it. It didn't sound that great to my ear. And I also didn't like a lot of the conversations that I heard amongst Spanish speakers in Spain. I found quite a lot of negativity that I heard on the street, and I didn't particularly like that. The way they talk about, sometimes when you hear people talking about, like in a very open public way, commenting on other people, talking about well, all sorts of things about that person. And I didn't particularly like that. About that was one thing in Spain I particularly didn't like. Whereas the opposite in Germany, I quite enjoyed the way people spoke to each other and how they interacted, and even like a family environment. I've heard siblings in Spain say really horrible things to each other. I mean, it sounds funny and I kind of half laugh, but it's actually quite horrible. I mean, I heard us, yeah, I mean, I'm not saying this doesn't happen in other countries, and it's a very subjective experience. I'm aware of that too. But because you asked me the question, I'm sharing. Yeah, but whereas in Germany, it was kind of the opposite. I heard people say very sweet things and use the language in a very sweet way. So yeah, that's kind of one. But then now I don't really have those feelings anymore. And as I say, they were just a very small thing for me. Italian, I was never really bothered about Italian. But when I first started learning it, it was because it was the language on offer at university, and I was like, okay, I'll do Italian. Why not? I got more into it because other friends of mine were doing it, and I felt like I wanted to learn it too. So a little bit like we were talking about before, about seeing other people doing things and you want to do them too. I didn't really have a FOMO moment, fear of missing out, but it definitely, I was more attracted to Italian after my friends had started learning it. And in the end, I actually ended up really liking Italian, and I really enjoyed my time in Italy. So I'm very, very pleased that I learned Italian and got over it. I tend to like more sound-rich languages. Like, I think Swedish sounds cool, for example, or I like Icelandic for the sound. But yeah, I think that's possibly it. When they're not as sound rich, sometimes I find it harder. But yeah, they're the two examples that I can give you. Hey, hallo. Hallo Richard, gibt es in der Sprachgemeinde viele Rivalen und Opponenten, die mit Dreck um sich werfen? Nee, gar nicht, Kurt. Wirklich nicht, nee. Ich meine, nee, sie sind alle Freunde eigentlich. Also für mich, ich kann nur von dem, was ich eigentlich erlebt habe, sagen. Ne? Und ja, ich kann dir erzählen, dass ja von meiner Seite ist es immer so gewesen, dass die Leute mit mir immer so nett sind und waren. Und ja, also von Leuten wie Moses McCormack, der ganz lieb war. Und ja, Wouter auch sehr lieb. Der Luca Lampariello, Professor Arguelles, Lydia Machova, Judith Meyer, ja, die Christine auch aus Frankreich. Die sind alle sehr liebe Leute, wirklich. Sehr nett. Und ja, also, nee, eigentlich kein Dreck. Ja, die waren immer so wirklich sehr lieb. Und ja, so wirklich Freunde, würde ich sagen. Ja, es ist nicht so spannend, ne? Aber es ist halt so. In your opinion, if a person works full-time, 40 to 60 hours, wow, that's a lot. How many languages can they learn at once? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Depends what work they're doing. If they're doing 60 hours a week, wow. I have to sort of, I mean, I come from a European point of view, right? So a working week in Europe is like 37 hours. And that's including your lunch breaks and your coffee breaks and whatever else. So 40 to 60 hours is a lot. That's more than full time for Europeans. I'm very fortunate in that I don't have that level of work commitment, or haven't had that level of work commitment. Although there have been projects where I have definitely worked even over 60 hours, certain weeks, but only when it's really, really necessary. But not as a norm. How many can you study at once? It depends on what your work is and what you do. You have time during your day? What does your day look like? Have you got dead time that you can use? Have you got other things that you can do? Have you got a job where you have to be fully focused, like listening, speak? You know, you can't do anything except the job. Just depends on so many things. But it's worth trying one and then trying a second or a third and seeing how it goes and how it works for you. If you do have the additional time and if you're not exhausted from a 40 to 60 hour work week, which is a lot of hours, then possibly you can do, you know, a few, but it's not something that I would necessarily be able to give you a blanket answer for, if that makes sense, because clearly there are very different jobs out there and there are very different responsibilities out there. You know, I'm not going to say if you're a surgeon and you're working that many hours that you distract yourself during an operation with with some podcasts or something. I don't know, but you know, it really depends on what you're doing and how important, you know, it is that you're fully concentrated in your job. Hello, Richard. My question, it's necessary, or is it necessary or optional to learn the IPA, the International Phonetic Alphabet, to become a polyglot? No, it's not obligatory. I mean, there are many people out there who don't learn it and learn a number of languages. I had to learn it at university. So if you study languages for your degree, it would be, I guess, possible to learn, to study and get a degree in a language without having studied the IPA. But yeah, I mean, many people know it anyway. In the sort of, when you study a number of languages, can help to help you with understanding the difference between certain sounds, right? And to make those differences, it can be a big help because you can see a different representation. and have examples of where that word works, it doesn't work. And then when you see the new language and you try and work out what the sound is, so you're not focusing just on the accent, or other things around individual sounds, you can actually see or perceive them more easily if you're aware of the IPA, I would say. But yeah, not a prerequisite, I would say. Yeah. Richard, do you keep grammar or vocabulary notes? I have done. I don't in more recent studies, no. Years ago, yes, I did. Nowadays, I tend to be able to carry my books with me. So before, because I had to write everything out, the notes that I wanted, now I've got the books often in digital form. I can just carry them with me, so I don't bother so much. I can just refer back to things if I want to. But yeah, vocabulary notes, usually not really. I sometimes might jot things down. I like to write things down, but I don't keep them as notes necessarily. I have got notes. I've got, as I talk to you now, I'm looking at a stack of notes from when I studied Turkish at Yunus Emre Institute, and studied up to B1 level. So yeah, I have done, but not at the moment. And yeah, I don't do that for the Celtic languages that I'm studying right now. Do you find it helpful to compare the similarities and differences between languages in your notes? Usually those similarities and differences, the comparisons I make tend to be more in my head, simply because yeah, if I start thinking about notes and writing everything down, I'd probably go a bit crazy. But once I've internalized something, it's easier to make the comparison from an internalized and understood and sort of mastered part of a language, because then you're going from a position of strength rather than looking at notes and seeing the comparison. Sometimes it can strengthen, but sometimes it can actually weaken the learning. Is that controversial to say? I don't know. We'll see. See what you think. Hope it makes sense. I'd say. Merhaba Richard, Duolingo'ya uzun bir aradan sonra Hawaiian Creole öğrenmek için dönmüşüz. Okay, evet. Çok sevindim. İyi öğrenmeler ve zihin açığı dilerim. Evet, bu çok ilginç bir dildir ve Maori'ye çok benziyor. Benziyormuş. Ama ben hiçbir zaman Hawaii Creole'i öğrenmedim ve bu yüzden bunu sadece anladım, değil mi? Ama çok ilginç bir şey. Çok sevdim. Teşekkür ederim Halil. Richard, do you know and respect Alexander Arguelles? Absolutely, he's a friend of mine. Alexander Arguelles is a lovely, lovely person, and he and I have spent weeks together. So yeah, I've spent time with him in various countries. He came to the Polyglot Conference on a number of occasions. I've also spent time with him in the US with his family, and yeah. So I mean, Alexander Arguelles and I are friends. So yes, I do have a lot of respect for him, and yes, I know him. So I'm very lucky to be able to call him a friend. I was watching someone on negative rant, and I couldn't even watch the vid because I was at 1.5 hours long and said nothing. Oh wow! Okay, about Alexander Arguelles now, it's got to be nonsense. If somebody's on a rant against Alexander Arguelles, it's got to be nonsense. I mean, he's a really fine man. He's really nice. He is super nice and super knowledgeable about languages, and very, very pleasant to be around, and has a lot of really cool things to share. So I say this, look, when it comes to other people thinking things, this is where I say it's good to be open to listening to other points of view. But You can also listen to a point of view and then judge it on your experience of that person or what you've heard them say and what you've seen them do, and write it off as rubbish. You know, it's also possible to listen to a point of view and just say, okay, that's not what I see, hear, understand, or believe. It's not what I see as my reality, and therefore I'm going to just reject it. We don't have to have arguments about that. Or, you know, but if someone's got a very strong or is very strongly speaking out against somebody, particularly somebody in like a language learning community like this, I mean, unless they're kind of like really, really awful people, there's generally no reason to be doing that kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, you've got to, I mean, from my point of view, I also have to think, well, who's saying this and why they're saying it is my first thought. And I hope that person finds more happiness and a more stable mental state, so that they don't feel the need to attack or belittle or be rude about people that they don't possibly even know, except for a few interactions on the internet. Because I can't imagine anyone knowing or having met Alexander Arguelles making a video that defames him in any way. He's just a very, very nice person. And yeah. Anyway. Haitian Creole, özür dilerim. Evet. Haitian Creole. Evet. Hawaiian çok, evet, çok farklı bir dildir. Haitian Creole çok ilginç de aynı, evet. Ben de bir zaman bu nasıl şimdi? Nasıl bu aplikasyon içinde Clubhouse, evet, Clubhouse içinde bir Haitian Creole öğretmenim vardı ve onunla beraber Haitian Creole çok az ama onunla çok az Haitian Creole'yi öğrendim. Çok ilginç bir dildir ve bana göre daha farklı Fransızcadan, değil mi? Daha farklı ve çok şaşırdım ama evet, maalesef bu kurs gibi bir şeydi ama evet, devam etmedik. Çünkü o Amerika'da yaşıyor ve ben Avrupa'da yaşıyor ve bizden hiç olmazdı. Ama başka bir defa devam etmek istiyorum. Ve şimdi nerede bu dili konuşabilirsin? İnternette bir grup mu var mı? John, let me see. Why were the Celtic languages your retirement languages? I love that you asked that question. And seeing as you've started into most now, as your language retirement plan now changed, yes. Well, yes and no. So the Celtic languages were my retirement plan languages for the simple reason that Welsh was really my priority when I was younger, because it was my heritage language and I wanted to reclaim that language. So I did that a lot earlier on. It was one of my earlier on languages that I learned. And the other Celtic languages I was interested in, but I recognized and realized that I wasn't going to be going to places where they were spoken in the very near future, because they're not necessarily holiday destinations that the family wants to go on with me. So it was going to be something that I would need to wait for my daughter to go to university, my wife and I to be that bit older. So my wife could enjoy maybe a sun type holiday with friends, and I could go and do things that she wasn't potentially as keen on. So that was kind of the thought process behind it. And also because I have that in me with, the sort of the link to the other Celtic languages through Welsh. I did want to go to them. And then when COVID hit and we came online and it became possible, I never imagined that I'd be studying Cornish. I hadn't planned to learn Cornish as one of the first. I thought that I always had this thing for Manx, to be honest with you, because really the Isle of Man is the closest other Celtic nation to where I'm from, after Wales, obviously. So the Isle of Man is just in the sort of in between Ireland and Great Britain. And so I went to the Isle of Man a few times as a child, and it's part of the region. In fact, it was always on the weather reports where I grew up. And I went to the Isle of Man and I bought books when I was maybe 10 or on, it's been 10 years old. I had these books on Manx from that age. So I'd always been interested in it, but it was impossible to find anywhere to study. And unfortunately, the Manx language didn't really come online in the same way during COVID as Cornish did. And then a friend of mine suggested that I join the Cornish group. She wanted to learn Cornish, and we started it together. And her situation changed, so she couldn't continue with the class, but I could. And then I started making my own friends from that group. And then I met other people in other groups and joined those groups. And the Cornish language community is really quite a nice community to be in. And so it kind of stuck. So from doing a little bit of Cornish for like a year or so, which was my original thought, I ended up doing it for a second year, sitting the exam, and now I started my third year. And yeah, I mean, I can do this year, then I can do a fourth year, and there's a grade 4 exam. And after the grade 4 exam, you can actually become a bard of the Cornish language. And there's a whole ceremony that you go through in Cornwall. So yeah, I imagine that would be a more retirement thing for me to do, but actually I'm pretty glad actually that things changed. And has my plan changed now? Yes, I would say it has. It's not 100% clear what that plan is though yet, but clearly, yeah, sort of learning other Celtic languages, because that process has happened and started happening, sort of ongoing, and I really enjoy them. And I enjoy Irish as well, and I enjoy doing some Scottish Gaelic, and will enjoy doing more of that in the future too. I think that I will keep the Celtic languages going for the time being, for sure. And I might revisit them again with more intensity later in life. I don't know, but the plan is to continue at least Cornish, but maybe the other two as well, a bit further on down the line. I'm not sure about Breton yet. I've not made any firm decisions whether or not I will learn Breton. I think probably I'd like to improve my Cornish to a high enough level before I even think about Breton. But so I think I find it very confusing. But yeah, and yes, things have changed. Let me see. Okay. Let me see. Oh my word. Okay. So why English is so difficult for French speakers? Thanks. Is English difficult for French speakers? English and French are quite similar in a lot of ways. I think maybe it's the conversation, the speaking, right, is maybe what you mean, Nicola. And I think it is practicing speaking is the important thing. The good news for you is that even if you speak English with a strong French accent, we're very used to a French accent. And in fact, many English speakers find a French accent quite pleasing to the ear. We enjoy listening to a French accent. So you have that advantage. So even if you feel self-conscious or embarrassed or shy about learning, you can at least know that we do like a French accent usually. So yeah, I mean, we have a lot of words that are the same, though, an awful lot. So when you get past the very beginning stages of English, where we've got more Germanic language and grammar, you'll get to the French and you'll find you'll fly. You'll do very, very well, because you have basically almost all of our vocabulary as a French speaker. Let me see. Hi, Rachel. Just wanted to say I really enjoy listening to you. Your video on reframing failing to learn a language really resonated with me. I am learning not to be so self-critical. Thank you. Oh, that's really kind of you. Thank you very much for commenting that. I appreciate it. What is the point in learning 20 languages if you only know around 50 words in each language? Well, you know 50 more words than you didn't know before. So it depends what you want to get out of it, Michael. I mean, I get where you're coming from. Although I don't know if that's aimed at an individual or group of people that you specifically know. But the people I know that have studied more than 20 languages, very often they know more than 50 words. They've studied how the language works, and they can form. You need more than 50 words to form sentences and to understand things. So it's kind of not normally when I come across at 50 words. But let's just like take your comment as it is on face value. Let's say you learn 50 words, okay, in 20 languages. What have you lost? Nothing. I personally don't think you've lost anything. You've gained 50 words in 20 languages, which if you go to the country and that's all you know, it's better than not knowing anything. So let me give you an example from my life, right? The first time I went to Hungary, I knew no Hungarian. But about a week before the trip, I picked up a Teach Yourself book. I flicked through it and I maybe picked up fewer than 50 words. But when I went to Hungary and no one spoke English wherever I went, the words that I picked up, one of them was étterem, which is a restaurant. And you know what we needed? To eat. And you know what I could say? Restaurant. And you know what we found? The étterem, the restaurant to go and eat. It worked. It was better than not knowing anything. And that's just one word, not 50. So if you have 50, wow. I mean, you've got 50 words that you can use for whatever you want. Okay, pick words that you might want to say. But even a word in certain contexts is better than not knowing anything. But I don't know if anybody's actually advocating that that's all people should or do. And these are not choices. These are not, you learn nothing or you learn 50 words in 20 languages. It's not that or that. It's not an either or here. You can study one language, 2 languages, 3 languages to a very high level, and then study 20, where you get 50 or 100 or 200 or 1,000 words, whatever you want, whatever that number is. It doesn't devalue the languages you speak and have focused on, but it does take you from 0 to the 50 or whatever number of words it is that you've learned in the other languages. So I don't see it as a bad thing. Even a little bit's better than nothing. But there's not an either or situation. Do you know what I mean, Michael? I don't think it's that. How many languages would you learn at the same time if you had 2 to 4 hours per day for this purpose? 2 to 4 hours a day. Depends on the languages. I'm so sorry for doing. I don't do this on purpose, you know, but it's true. Depends on the languages. So typically, if you learn a language that's very different to the language or languages you already speak, and one that's similar or more closely related, that can help so that you feel motivated, you're always moving forwards, and you feel like that kind of momentum building up. If you've got 2 to 4 hours a day, I mean, you could possibly do a couple of a couple of languages, or maybe you could even try 3. Depends on you. I wouldn't go too crazy. You've got to divide your study, but then you've also got to divide your thinking time in those languages too. So it's not just one thing you're doing, right? You're not just studying, you're actually studying and you're having to think, having to process, having to deal with the information. And if you add too many, it gets a bit crowded and cramped, and you don't actually end up thinking about them, and you forget everything almost that you've, particularly in languages that you've not seen very much of or anything of before, you don't speak any related languages. It's amazing how quickly those words fall off. So yeah, trying out with numbers is always the best way, and seeing what works for you personally. Greetings from Brazil. Greetings. Hello. Hola. Tudo bem? Thanks for answering the question. You're very welcome. Regarding Professor Wallace, I trust my gut, and his methods have helped me, and he has been kind in videos. Yeah, I think that's good. You know, trusting what works for you. Like, this is one of the things, right? What works for you is the important thing. So what one person does and does with success might be different to what the second or the next or the third or the fourth, fifth person does and does with success. You've got to take the elements that work for you. And that's important, that you recognize what works for you. Do you have awareness of the Uralic languages? Mari? No, I don't. I know they exist, but I don't have, like, I've not studied them. They seem endangered because Russian dominates in these regions. Yeah, often when you've got a language like that, like Russian or English or German or French or Greek or Spanish, or, you know, a lot of these languages tend to dominate over Italian. You know, a lot of these languages do tend to dominate. But yes, I'm aware of them, and I'm aware that they are, less. Yeah, so less well cared for, I guess, than say other languages in the same group. Are you planning to retire from language learning, or are you going to continue learning languages into your 60s and 70s like Steve Kaufman? I'm Team Steve all the way when it comes to learning. Why not? I mean, what else am I going to do? Seriously, like, what else am I going to do? I enjoy language learning. I mean, I don't do this because I definitely don't do it for money. So what else am I going to be doing it for? I mean, I enjoy it. It's a hobby. I happen to have been able to scratch a living from it. You know, in like finding jobs where my language awareness and ability is needed. But yeah, I mean, I do it because I like it. That's the real main thing for me. Speaking English. Okay, what did I say? Okay, I think that's a different. Let me see. Okay. I think there's a whole conversation about veganism. Oh, wow. I didn't know that veganism was. So, is it okay? Can you speak Danish? So, I can speak a little bit of Danish. Jeg taler lidt dansk, men jeg har været i Danmark. Jeg arbejdede jeg havde et projekt, og det var i Billund. Jeg var der. Jeg talte dansk. Jeg snakkede på dansk der, men jeg snakker ikke så godt nu. Jeg snakker aldrig dansk her i Makedonien. Det går ikke. Jeg forstår godt. Jeg kan snakke. Jeg snakker ikke perfekt. Ikke som svensk. Men det er okay. Det er okay. You can tell me what you think. Ja, du kan se. Hvis du tænker, at jeg snakker dansk, er okay for mig. Jeg synes, jeg snakker ikke dansk, okay. Ja, det er ikke så vigtigt. Are you using your native accent in English? If not, why not? Do you view marginalized accents differently than marginalized languages? Are you studying Welsh, but using a more posh accent in English? Complicated question. So my original accent and dialect in English is not how I speak right now. Why do I speak the way I speak? Well, very, very good question, but a very long answer would be required. I was told through media, education, society, that the way I spoke originally was frowned upon and not educated and all of these things. And also I had that as one thing. So an internalized, not for me personally. I mean, nowadays I've kind of worked through that myself. I don't hold those views about my original Scouse way of speaking. I actually think it's quite a nice way to speak, and it's the closest thing to me. But as I grew older, I just got used to speaking this way, and this became the way I speak. And there are elements of Scouse. I mean, anyone who analyzes my speech patterns or vocabulary use or whatever else, they will be able to detect where my original way of speaking. So it's not that I speak posh English necessarily. I mean, I definitely still have northern vowels. So I say grass and glass. So those still exist in my English. That's just generally northern English. But the other thing that happened was from the age of about 11, where I went to school, there were children from different areas that had very different accents. And I ended up playing with the children that were from sort of Cheshire. And so my accent drifted more towards their way of speaking and away from my original way of speaking as well. So that process happened in a more natural way for me. So the way I speak now isn't unnatural for me. This isn't an unnatural way of I'm not putting on a voice or a way of speaking at the moment. It is a way I speak, an authentic way I speak. But there is another reason why I would definitely choose to speak this way over my original accent. First of all, because I've been doing it for many years. Secondly, because for an international audience, for me to speak in fluent Scouse would be particularly difficult for a lot of people to understand, because they've not been, including some monolingual English speakers. They wouldn't follow everything I say. So I'm using an auxiliary language and way of speaking that works for an international audience, and that's the audience that I'm addressing in these videos. So kind of the same way that if you were to put me in a room where the auxiliary language was Spanish, I would speak Spanish. And even with Spanish, if I recognized that actually people were not able to follow the Spanish that I learned, I would try to bring my Spanish to a more easily understood standard. It's not going to be a perfect standard, but it will. I may try and rein it in a little bit. So, yeah, that's kind of that. I hope that explains it. But I don't see, from my point of view, every way of speaking is valid, and I don't agree with some of the advice and some of the points of view that I was exposed to growing up. And I think that the one thing I will say for the UK, particularly England, actually, is that there have been some improvements from when I was younger about regional differences and variations in spoken English. You hear a kind of a watered down version of regional accents and, on news now and things like that, more than you did before. And not just comedians, it would be like people reading the news, for example. And you didn't hear that as much when I was a child. So there's an improvement, but yeah, I mean, the UK has suffered with a similar kind of thing that other countries suffered as well. France being one example, but also Germany. Germany, very often when people move, they will almost swap out of a dialect, and they call it a dialect, and could even just say it's a language, whatever you want to use. It's kind of semantics, but one variation. I'm favouring a Hochdeutsch or standard French way of speaking over their natural way of speaking. Okay, I see more things about vegans. And sorry, I don't know what the vegan conversation is. I'm kind of catching bits of it, but I'm going to not focus on the veganism thing because it's not my territory. Hello, Richard. My question is a bit silly. Okay, but I'm curious to know, how do you deal with polythemic words when learning a foreign language? I hope you can read and answer my question. Polythemic words. I'm not sure what you mean when I'm learning the language. I'm not quite sure what you mean. Can you give an example? Trust me. Okay, no, that's vegan again. I've got lots of vegan questions, comments. Okay. Okay, I'm finding it hard to get modern resources for Eastern Armenian, and I'm a bit discouraged because I feel I'm not making progress. There is a modern Armenian course that I've got somewhere here. Where is it? It's like quite new. It's like maybe a few years old. I'll get it for you to show you. There we go. You find out. Have you seen this one for Eastern Armenian? This is a pretty cool book. It's one of the. Here's the code for you, so you can see the barcode, and I'll just hold it up so you can see it properly. If you're interested in Eastern Armenian. So yeah, there's this one. I got this actually. A friend brought it over from Yerevan to one of the events that I was at. But this is quite a cool book. It's quite nicely put together. I've not been through it yet. I studied some Eastern Armenian at a college in Yerevan, AVC College in Yerevan. I did it for a year and a half and didn't get very far with it. And I think possibly I can relate to your frustration there, Julie. But yeah, I mean, this book, when I saw it and I read reviews about it, it looked really good. So I got this one, and I'll see how it. One day I hope to get this. Maybe this will be my retirement language. Who knows? Maybe I'll go back to Georgian eventually as well. Okay, yeah, the thing with Eastern Armenian, there's Eastern Armenian and Western Armenian. Eastern Armenian is the version mostly spoken and like the state language and stuff of Armenia. Western Armenian tends to be spoken by the diaspora. So yeah, you tend to find, I think, that way around. Any Armenians that if I'm wrong, feel free to correct me. That's what I understood as the difference and what I remember. Greek is a dominant language. Oh yeah, Greek is a dominant language in Greece. Absolutely. Yeah, it's very difficult for minority languages in Greece. I mean, you speak Greek or Greek. So yeah, it's a dominant language, Greek. Absolutely, and it's a beautiful language, but it is a dominant language, and like they don't tend to have. So you've got a language like Vlach, for example, a Romanian that is spoken in Greece, but there's pretty much nothing done, or not very much done for it, as far as I'm aware. I've never heard of anything. Whereas Vlach, for example, a Romanian, there is something done in in a town where I am called Kruševo, which is an official language. But also in Romania, they have, I believe, like courses and things. The Romani languages, for example, in Greece, I have no idea if they do anything. Whereas in Skopje, there's an area called Shutka, and Shutka has the Romani language as an official language, or one of the official languages, and it's used in schools. So, in fact, it's the only country in the world where it has an official status. So, yeah, a lot of these languages are completely overlooked in Greece. Same with Bulgaria. A lot of these languages are overlooked. I'm not sure about Albania. I don't think they're particularly looked after in Albania either. I think it's mainly the state language that's the dominant language. But yeah, I mean, you don't see I've not seen anything in either of the languages. So yeah. Whereas in other countries, you see sort of community languages or local languages used or displayed. Like even like Serbia, for example, in Vojvodina, you will see things written in other languages other than Serbian, or in I mean in Romania, you got whole communities that speak Hungarian, I think even German. You've got loads of different languages, but you don't really get that in Greece in the same way. It's not that they don't exist. There are pockets of different minorities, but they are minoritized, for sure. I mean, I hope I'm not saying anything controversial. It's just is the way it is. What resources did you use while learning Dutch? I lived in the Netherlands, and I lived there for 2 years and worked through Dutch while I was there. But I actually did a course in Greek in the Netherlands to improve my Dutch, because I was with Dutch speakers then for the classes. But I did. It was, yeah. It is fairly straightforward to learn Dutch if you speak English and French and German, particularly because you've got quite a lot of influences from those three languages, or things in common with those three languages, should I say. And then, but the very first book that I looked at in Dutch was from Prisma, which is a Dutch publishing house, and it was Nederlands voor anderstaligen, so Dutch for foreigners. I think it was literally other speakers of other languages, and that's the book I went through in the very beginning. Have you ever tried to learn Turkish? I've been speaking Turkish on this call. Maybe you joined late. Salih. Evet. Ben Üsküp'te yaşıyorum ve bu yüzden Türkçe'de çok sık kullanmam lazım. Ama evet, Türkçe öğrendim. B1'e kadar. Ve bundan sonra sadece merkezde insanlarla konuşurum ve perhaps you speaking standard English to be understood by most. Yep, that's right, Richard. Any advice on getting a grasp of verb tenses in Spanish? Any exercises you recommend? Wow. Lots of practicing talking about different members of the family, people, and then talking about things that happened in the past and in the future, and plans and what's happening now, but deliberately adding detail into your conversations and what you're saying, and even your writing, if you're writing it as well, so that you get the practice. It can feel a little bit artificial to do that, but actually adding the detail is really important. Otherwise, you get stuck on the I form for everything. And so if someone says to you, for example, do you speak Spanish? And you go, yes, sí, hablo español. Pero mi mamá habla alemán también. Y nosotros juntos hablamos turco, or lo que sea, whatever you want to say. So it's good if you practice and play around with the conjugations, and then, pero cuando era pequeño, cuando era más joven, pues hablaba sueco. I used to speak Swedish. And so if you do that kind of thing, playing around with it, then you get used to the different tenses and forms. Yeah. Scouse accent is really hard to understand. Yes. Yes. And if I were to speak in thick Scouse, as in like really strong accents with the dialectal forms, it's not going to be that comprehensible to anyone, really. I mean, it's not that it will be an unknown language, but it would make it more challenging to understand me. So yeah, I mean, I tend not to use it for these lives, except as a display or to illustrate a point. That'd be the only time. I actually was just learning about Polythemic Words in linguistics course and taking it at university. Those are the words that have different meanings in context. For example, open, not closed, honest. Oh, yeah, okay. I find that those extra meanings and added meanings come with time in language. That, for example, There are some of them that are absolutely like the one open, for example. If I were to say that the language I've just been speaking now just recently was Turkish, right? So open would be açık, it's open, but it means like open as in open, but it also means you can say açık bir insan, like an open person, like open to you know to be able to speak easily to them, for example. So yeah, some of them are very obvious, others are not. They I find they come with time, usually. Yeah. But yes, I know what you mean, and I try not to learn all of the meanings all at once, if that helps, just because I tend to like to see where the additional meanings come into play. If I had to answer on how to deal with these words, I'd recommend to simply study these words in their different contexts. Perfect, Michael, we're on the same page. Yep. Okay, I think I got to the end of all of the questions on YouTube. Which languages do I use on a daily basis? Macedonian, English, French, Spanish, German at home, and then usually, typically outside the house, Albanian, Turkish, Serbian, Croatian, Bosnian, Montenegrin, versions of those languages, because we send a lot of jokes and a lot of music and stuff is in those languages, and Bulgarian as well. And then what else would I speak typically outside? And then I'd use ones on the internet, for example, as well. Like I'm studying Cornish at the moment, so I speak Cornish maybe 4 times a week. Maybe a little bit more, depends, or I may read things or see things or hear things. Similar thing with Irish that I'm learning at the moment, and Nahuatl, which I have some time just learning bits of. My goal isn't to be to carry on Nahuatl potentially. Well, I don't know. At the moment, my goal isn't to carry on much beyond the conference right now, because once that's happened, I may not be able to use it in the same way. But I'll never say never, because I had the same thoughts about Cornish, and here I am 2 years later. But we'll see. So there's that, and then there's other languages that I would typically see through work or things like that, which would be other Slavic languages, Romance languages, and Germanic languages. Your kind of regular languages that you'd see, but then also I have my social media is in multiple languages, so quite a lot. So yeah, that's kind of my norm. See, okay, I'm aware that I'm over time in terms of I'm well over the hour, and I do have to go and prepare some more videos for the Polyglot Conference, and going to try and get them all uploaded. So I've got videos still from last year that need to be uploaded into the live environment, so that anyone coming online to the Polyglot Conference will be able to watch videos and sessions from last year. And in fact, we even have lessons and stuff that I'm going to be putting up into the Saturn Theatre, which is the online theatre that we have. And okay, let me see if there's any other questions. Gracias per la verrada d'avui, Richard, sempre tan interessant. Moltes gràcies. Okay. Moltes gràcies. Let me see. Sí, per mi és una cosa que m'agrada molt, parlar amb la gent. I sí, parlar les altres llengües també, que vaig aprendre a la universitat i també en la meva vida. Sí, per mi és una cosa molt important i una cosa que m'agrada molt, i que forma no solament una part molt gran de la meva vida, però també les coses que faig per al treball també, que és la meva vida professional també, socialment i professionalment, sí que són les llengües que realment que tinc que parlar, tinc que comprendre bé i usar molt. Sí que per a mi parlar sobre els temps, així com, per exemple, com aprendre una altra llengua, sí que és un tema molt particular i també un tema per a mi que per a moltes persones és un problema també que moltes vegades les persones pensen que tenen una situació molt particular amb les llengües, però moltes vegades també és el mateix problema que tenim tots. I jo penso que per a mi era així amb diverses llengües. I no tinc totes les solucions per a tothom, però sí que també puc dir les coses que per a mi són coses clares i que són els mateixos problemes que tens tots en la vida. Doncs, sí. Moltes gràcies. Thank you very much for joining me and for the time together and for your questions and for your comments. And yeah, I look forward to speaking to you again. Parles molt bé el català. No. Gràcies. Sí, m'agrada molt el català, però no tinc oportunitat per a practicar la llengua. Doncs per a mi sí que vaig veure el comentari en català. Sí, m'agradaria parlar més. Per què no? Donc, yeah, so thank you very much for joining me. Γεια σου, Richard. Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ. Thank you very much for joining me. And yeah, indeed, feel free to join me again if you want any specific help with your individual learning. You can reach me on Patreon as well. You're very welcome to join me and to have the sessions with me. We can talk through your individual needs. It's one of the things I do. I enjoy doing this and I'll continue to do this as well. But I appreciate that as individuals, we have our own specific journeys that we go on. And as you can see from the questions that we get, we talk about each week, I often have to sort of say, how do we manage, depending on so many factors. So language learning is a very individual process. And so to answer questions in a very general way is quite challenging. טיפ על היברו, למדתי רק קצת עברית במקדוניה, גם חברים שלי, אבל עכשיו אין לי חברים מן ישראל בארץ, אבל לפעמים אני מדבר גם העולם מן Polyglot Gathering, Polyglot Conference, קצת עברית, אבל אני רוצה לדבר יותר טוב. I'm learning English by church. Oh, wow. Yeah, well, that's cool bananas. Go for whatever works for you. Is absolutely brilliant. And yeah, I think church can be a great way of learning, or whatever group or organization you are in. If you have a community is really, really important. So absolutely. I'm going to have to leave now, unfortunately. Wie viele Sprachen sprichst du? Oh, eine sehr gute Frage. Das kann ich gar nicht sagen. Ich meine, es kommt darauf an, was heißt Sprachen und was heißt sprechen und was heißt. Also so eine Frage, Entschuldigung. Es klingt so normal, ne? Das ist so eine Frage. Ich verstehe, was du meinst. Ich benutze so 5 Sprachen zu Hause und dann vielleicht dann 10 noch. Also in der Stadt und also in der Nähe hier in Skopje, aber ja, schwierig zu sagen. Ganz viele. How long should I study before start practicing speaking with someone? Start speaking whenever you want, Raphael. You are in the driving seat. If you feel comfortable speaking, speak. But if your goal is to speak, you need to speak. Otherwise, you're not going to speak. If you just read and just write, you're going to be a good reader and a good writer. If you don't speak at all, you know, you need to do it. Anyway, I do have to go. I'm sorry. I wanted to catch those two final questions, but pleasure to speak to you all. Have a fantastic week. Happy language learning. And I look forward to seeing you again. Oh, I'm not here next week. I'm going to be at the Memorize offices. So I will speak to you the week after next. I will see you in 2 weeks' time. Yes. So looking forward to it. Take care. And yeah, до свидания. Говорю по-русски тоже, да. Всего хорошего. Thank you. All the best. Take care. Bye-bye.